What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Frankie D'Astoli Show. I am your host, Frankie D'Astoli. Excited to have you here as always. If you guys haven't listened to my last episode, The Sound of Real Estate, these are a few of my favorite deals. It comes from the movie Sound of Music. It was Christina's idea to title it that, which I thought rang perfectly. I would highly recommend you go back and listen to that. You don't have to listen to that in order to listen to this episode, but in that episode, I pretty much just highlight a few of my favorite deals from 2024. I talk about a 4-property portfolio that my partner and I purchased using creative finance. I talked about a deal that we bought as a 2-bedroom that we flipped into a third, had to have a 3rd bedroom, and it added about $50,000 in value to it. And I talk about some other great deals as well and some private money lending and stuff like that. So that's a great episode to definitely go back and listen to if you haven't. But today's episode is going to focus on the mistakes that were made in 2024. And let me tell you, there is a long list that I have written out for you guys to go over. And I'm very, very excited. But today's been quite an interesting day. I'm recording this. It's 1:34 p.m. I'm still yet to eat anything today. I rolled jujitsu this morning, and it's been a little while since I've rolled jujitsu because of my wisdom teeth extraction, and then plus just with the holidays and stuff, I just haven't really gotten on the mats. But I had a great roll. I'm feeling really, really sore, and I came home today after jujitsu, and I go immediately in the basement. I throw my clothes in the laundry just to avoid any interaction with the family at that point. And about 25 minutes after that, I had showered. I'm getting ready to go to the grocery store with Christina and Bernadette, and I just automatically realized, oh my gosh, the rosary that I'm obsessed with that Christina got me for Christmas, the military combat rosary, is in the wash. I left it in my sweatshirt. So I sprint downstairs, I shut it off, and I pull it out, and it's just totally drenched with the leather pouch that comes with it, and I'm just disappointed, right? And it just affected my entire mood for about a full 90 minutes. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, it's looking a little faded, and I'm just so frustrated because I love this thing so much. I think it's so awesome. And it was just one of those things where after we went to the store, I was just in one of those annoyed moods, and then I come back, and I just started looking at some pictures of it when I first got it, and I'm like, you know what, it actually kind of looks the same. I think it was just kind of faded like that the whole time. It's in gunmetal, that's the color of it, and ultimately I just realized, regardless of if it's faded or if it's not faded, it's such a small thing, right? It doesn't change the way that I use it to pray. It doesn't change the awesomeness of the gift itself and the way that it looks. The 3 medals are still on there: the miraculous medal, the St. Joseph medal, the St. Benedict medal. The pardon crucifix is still the same. None of it really matters. It's such a small thing, right? And I kind of just reflected. I'm like, you know what? 2024 was an awesome year. There was so much growth, but one thing that I still realize about myself is I just tend to sweat some of the smaller things. And again, no, I'm not saying it's not a valid reason to be annoyed about something. It was such a little mistake, and I'm about to talk about a lot bigger mistakes that still have some repercussions on what's going on in my life. But just one of those moments where I was just like, oh my gosh, it was just so frustrating. But in all regards, after I looked at it, it looks actually like it did when I first got it. So I don't even think that it is faded. So I definitely feel a little bit happier about it. But it was just one of those moments where I was just like, I need to just stop sweating the small stuff so much. And just to kind of throw in a little bit of Catholicism, as I usually do, yesterday was the feast day of St. John the Apostle, also known as the beloved disciple. And I really relate St. John to just being a real one. He was just one of the realest apostles, if not the realest apostle. He was the one that was at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified. Jesus also says to St. John, he says, behold your mother, and woman, behold your son, which is in, the way us Catholics interpret it, that is Jesus giving Mary to us to have as our mom, and Mary is our mom, and we're looked at as her children. So it's one of those really awesome things. St. John is known for writing the Gospel of John. I believe there's 3 letters of John that he has also written, and the book of Revelations, which is something in 2025 that I plan on diving into a little bit more, and I plan on talking a little bit about on this podcast as well. But we celebrated the St. John feast yesterday, and he is, like I said, just a real one when it comes to your apostles, when it comes to your disciples, the beloved disciple, because Jesus had such great affection and love for him. So if you haven't celebrated it, it's a good time to kind of just reflect on it and maybe read the Gospel of John a little and kind of learn a little bit more about him. But that's my little kind of 2 cents for some Catholicism and for some religion today. We are going to get into the mistakes made by myself and by my partner in 2024 as we were scaling a real estate portfolio. And I think a lot of these mistakes It's funny because you'll hear them and you'll be like, that's so common. Like, why would you not think of that? Like, that's obviously like really obvious of something that you should do. And I think when you're scaling a portfolio, and just in general, when you're buying real estate, like, you don't really know until you get slapped in the face a little bit, right? And even after you get slapped, sometimes you still don't really realize until you start like actually getting hit a couple more times, right? And I think you're going to see some of those examples in here, but there's also so much other stuff going on, right? Like with one property, you could have one little mistake that leads into a bunch of other things, but you also got to remember, like, we have so many other properties that we're dealing with also that, like, that's not always on the forefront of our mind. And again, not to say that even if you don't have a portfolio and you are just have one or two properties, that these mistakes wouldn't happen to you and could happen to you and might have even happened to you if you already have passed that point. But if you are brand new and you don't have any real estate, you haven't scaled a portfolio, maybe it's something that you're, attempting to do or thinking about doing, I hope that you take a ton of value from these mistakes that I've learned. And one thing that I will say is when it comes to mistakes, these are actually good things to have happen. And in the moment, it doesn't feel great. Sometimes even after the fact, when you realize I've lost a ton of money because of this mistake, it's not always the best feeling, but it depends on how you respond to those mistakes. If you just kind of like brush it off the shoulder and just forget that it really happened, and then, you continue to walk down the line, odds are it's going to continue to happen to you again. But if you take those mistakes and you analyze them and you say, why did this happen? How do I feed into that? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? There's usually really, really good positives that come from that and actual opportunities that emerge. And what I've seen the most is whenever we make a mistake within, our portfolio or anything in general now, even if I'm scaling my D'Astoli's Dojo or Rosary and real estate, whatever the case might be, if I make a mistake, how do I turn that into an SOP, right? Like, how do I create systems and processes around that? And you'll see a lot of that with some of these tenant interactions that I've had when they've gone south, when I've ended up in court. It's like, cool, why am I in court today? Well, I'm in court today because of this decision that I made and this decision that I made and this decision that I made. And now because I know why I'm there, I'm able to make an SOP around it so that way it doesn't happen again in the future. And truly, like, that has actually been one of the best things that I've pulled from 2024 is I'm going into 2025 with a ton of SOPs created. And now that we have people that are also working for us, I have someone that's in my property management division. I brought somebody else on that's working in my acquisitions division. I'm able to give them those SOPs that I created. And anytime they have any questions, cool. Hey, just refer to the SOP. Like, what does the SOP say to do in that situation? Cool. We got a deal under contract. What are the next steps? That's in the SOP. Oh, great. We're onboarding a tenant. What are the next steps? That's in the SOP. And because of the mistakes that I've made, I've been able to now form kind of, systems around those things, and now we execute on them, and those mistakes are a lot more it's mitigated. Not saying that they still don't happen. These mistakes still do happen, but if even then something goes wrong and it wasn't the SOP, now we're able to adjust the SOP to reflect why it went wrong. So all that to say is when you have mistakes in your business, feed into it. Understand why those mistakes were made and continue to double down so that those mistakes don't happen again. And ultimately, it's what you pull from those mistakes that are going to determine the trajectory of where you're going to go. So we got a lot of them. And I think this is going to be quite an interesting show. But before I get into that, last thing I'll say, D'Astoli's Dojo, REI.com. December 31st is the deadline for 25% off all mentorships and all courses. You get 25% off as a holiday sale. And on top of that, a portion of the proceeds is going to Good Counsel Homes, which is a foundation that brings in homeless mothers, homeless children, clothes them, feeds them, shelters them, gets them employment opportunities, gets them back on their feet. So if you come in to the dojo between now and December 31st, which now that I think about this episode, it will drop in time. You'll have that opportunity to do that, and that money will go towards Good Counsel Homes, and I would love to have you guys in the dojo. On top of that, D'Astoli's Dojo is also doing a free class. It's going to be an hour-long class. It's going to be January 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and that class is going to focus on how to acquire your next real estate investment deal with spending as little as $200 out of pocket. I'm literally going to show you guys how to do it for $0 out of your own pocket. I'm going to show you how to find real estate leads, how to get properties under contract for free, literally out of nothing out of pocket, or we're going to go up to $200 if you wanted to spend a little bit of money, get a little bit creative, make a little bit more damage. So I highly recommend that you guys go to D'Astoli's Dojo, REI.com, either sign up for that free class or take advantage of the special that we have for the mentorships and the courses, and it's also for a great cause. And last but not least, if you guys are enjoying the show, please rate it. please rate it, please review it, please like it, please subscribe on YouTube. I love making, these episodes. I love putting content out there, but what I love even more is when I get reviews and I hear from people that they're really enjoying the show and that it's changed their life in one way, shape, or another. And I also love feedback. So if you have anything that you would like to hear in particular on the show, or if you have any, thoughts on how I've been delivering content and anything that you think would be better to make the show better, please, please, please feel free to reach out to me. And you can find me on Instagram at Frankie D'Astoli _REI. REI stands for real estate investing. Cool. Well, we're going to get into this. So I'm going to talk on probably the biggest mistake that I've made to this point. And it came from when we purchased a property that was sitting vacant for about a couple of years. And really what ended up happening was we came in, we walked this property, and we were like, hey, this is a full cosmetic update. The roof looks good. The hot water tank looks like it's in good shape. The furnace is maybe a little bit hit or miss, but it should be fine. It's in working condition. It's all good. So we go in there, we do a cosmetic rehab on this property, and then we end up putting a tenant in there. And there's an issue with the tenant, which I'm going to get into. But we put the tenant in there. And about a couple days in, she had texted us and she says, hey, the basement is getting water. It's coming from one of the pipes. So I'm like, all right, look, like there's probably some sort of leak coming from the, kitchen or something like that. It's dripping into there, whatever it is. We end up sending a plumber out there and we find out that it's coming from the main sewer line. And what's happening is all of the sewage is backing up into the basement. It's a literal beep show, right? That's what it actually is. And we have this tenant in there. They're in there for a couple of days at this point. It's maybe even a week at this point that this started going noticed. But we're seeing that the sewage is backing up into the house. So every time they flush the toilet, the sewage is backing up. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. And it's something that no one should have to live in, right? So what do? Here's another mistake that we made. And the first mistake on that, guys, is you need to be testing everything before you put a tenant in there, right? And not just like running the water to see if it's working, turning on each light, like do it continuously. And now something that we created out of this is we make sure all of our contractors, they run the water for hours while they're in the property. We have the lights on, we have everything going on. We do full-blown like type of inspections before we put a tenant in there. But she's in there, this is all happening. So one mistake was we didn't test anything. That's a big problem. The second mistake is we gave an option of we can either temporarily put them in a hotel or we could get a porta potty and put it in the backyard because we thought that was a phenomenal idea at the time. And really what we shouldn't have done here is we shouldn't have given the option. We should have just put them in the hotel. And I'm going to explain why. They say, hey, we don't want to leave. We just moved all of our stuff in. It's not that big of a deal. If you get us a porta potty, put it in the yard, we'll be fine. So we do that, right? We order the porta potty. We get it sent over. The problem is it's not getting there for like 3 days. So obviously they're using the toilet and they're doing all of that stuff. And it's just continuing to backfill into the basement. Again, this is a disaster. I totally understand that. The porta potty ends up arriving. They start using it, this, that, and the third. We are going through a plumbing company to get this main line fixed. Now, when you get this main line fixed, what you guys need to understand is like, this is a big job. They need to dig into the sidewalk. There's permits that need to be pulled. Roads need to be blocked off. They need to access this main line, totally break it up, replace it with a whole new PVC pipe. It's a big job. This is not something that you just send a plumber in there and he's like fixing it in a day. This requires a lot of prep. And as this is going on, we have a front porch that we just beautifully redid with awesome like railings and totally refinished the porch and everything. That porch is a problem because the pipe is running under that porch. So we need to get framing crews out there to break this thing up, to frame it properly. And we're running into so many issues with the framing crew and the plumbing crew. The plumbing crew is not doing that portion of the job. So they keep coming back saying it's not stabilized enough. It's not stabilized enough. And they're also having trouble finding exactly where the main line runs because the city actually never marked it. So we end up having to get the city involved to come out and mark it. We have to bring the framers out like 3-4 times. Keep in mind, guys, now at this point, this is now weeks. This is weeks now. And we are still in this situation where they have a porta potty, but let's be realistic. Are they using it all the time? No, they're not. So we end up finally getting to a point where we get all the permits that's framed out properly. The company comes, they dig it up, they replace the main line. Now, after the main line's replaced, guess what? We have a bunch of sewage in this basement that we need to get rid of. So we have to call in like a mitigation team to clean out the sewage. And they end up cleaning it out. But the problem was they had to clean it one time before that. And then the main line was replaced, and then they had to come back out and clean it again. So they had to come out and clean it 2 times. And what we have issues here is, number one, this is a total botch job on our end, just from start to finish. But to replace that main line, it cost us $15,000. And our insurance doesn't cover that. So that's $15,000 out of pocket, right? Number two, is we then had to go through insurance to get the clean out done. And we were under the impression that the insurance company was covering this. The plumbing company, and this is, I don't want to actually even get into too much detail because this is still kind of going on. I don't want to say anything that I shouldn't be saying, but the plumbing company had told us that we were covered. The rep supposedly had called the insurance company. He said that it was covered, this, that, and the third. So we were under the impression that it was covered. All of a sudden, the insurance company denies it. They send us a bill for $18,000. We are now going back and forth with the insurance company, with the plumbing company, trying to figure this out so we're not held with the bill for $18,000. So all in all, if things go in the worst case scenario and we have to pay that, this was pretty much a $33,000 like mess up, right? And that could quickly destroy any gains that you made on a deal, which it did for this particular deal. Our gain on this was like 21,000. Now could potentially be in the whole 33 grand, which is a disaster. And that's, we're going to lose a lot of money on that deal. But also what we're seeing here and the mistake that's made is I relied on somebody else there to give me a very, very important determination. I relied on the rep to tell me that it was covered by insurance, where I should have done the groundwork to get on the phone with the insurance company and make sure that it was covered. Because if it wasn't, I may have changed my game plan up. I might have went with somebody else that was going to be a little bit cheaper, or I might have said, hey, look, like we can't do this twice. We need to get them in a hotel. We can't let them stay in that house anymore. They got to get out so that they're not in this place. We can just get it done once and we'll save money on that. So a lot of mistakes made within there. But the biggest things that I pulled, number one, guys, get inspections. And again, off-market real estate, I always relate it to like the underworld of real estate. Like there's just going to be problems. You kind of like the rules are different. It's not always like the same. Like you go get these properties under contract. There are no inspections, no contingencies. But what I've learned from this is like if we have a property that's sitting, for years without being occupied, we got to get an inspection on that house, right? It's one thing to know that there's a tenant in there and things are running relatively decently. We're comfortable getting that under contract, closing on that without, formal inspections. But if these things have been sitting vacant, there's, good chances that there's problems with these properties. We want to get inspections on those houses and make sure that they're clear. That's one thing that we learned, right? Number two, as I mentioned, test everything before you put a tenant in there. I mean, we had another issue like this where we didn't test, the furnace properly and the tenant ended up moving in. It was nice weather. And then, a few months later when it's cold, all of a sudden they go, hey, like, where's the thermostat? And our contractors drywalled right over the thermostat where you put it on the wall. So like they didn't even have a thermostat. We then have to go out, send somebody out there to install a thermostat. We find out the furnace doesn't work. We got to get it replaced. So just like all these little things that, when you burr a lot of the times too, you're so quick to like try to finish the rehab, get a tenant in there, get it refinanced. You can do your cash out refi, make some money on it, go recycle it into another deal. Take your time with a lot of those steps. Make sure that you're getting ahead so you don't have headaches in the back end. And then this another thing, guys, just don't get stingy on pricing with some of this stuff. And what I mean by that is we gave the tenants an option. We said, hey, do you guys want us to put you in a hotel for the time being while this gets fixed? Or do you want us to just send a porta potty out there? The porta potty cost us about $1,000. The hotel, if they were in there for a couple of weeks, probably would have cost us about $4,000, depending on how much it would have been. But at the end of the day, because we didn't do that, now we possibly have a bill for $18,000 if we don't get through insurance with this claim. So all that to say is don't be stingy on pricing. I know in the moment it feels like a gut check when you have to front thousands of dollars for a mistake that was made, but it could save you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in this case that it could if we would have just stuck to the plan and said we're putting them into a hotel. We're not letting them just stay there. So again, a lot of lessons learned. That was a big mistake that we're still even dealing with repercussions on, and this was back in July. So a lot going on there. We're going to move to another one, and I hope that you guys gained some insights from that one. We're going to get into evictions, right? So we were dealing with an eviction a couple of months ago, and there's a handful of mistakes that kind of come with this, but really one is like, we just didn't necessarily like screen our tenant well enough. And as a landlord, what you need to understand is when you bring a tenant into your property, this is make or break. And I want you guys to think on, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. I know I mentioned that show, that book a handful of times on this show. In his book, he describes an asset as something that puts money into your pocket. He describes a liability as something that takes money out of your pocket. So if I am in the rental income business, I look at most of my deals as assets, right? They're supposed to generate me money, right? On a consistent basis. I put a tenant in there, that tenant pays the mortgage, they pay extra on top of that mortgage, I put that into my pocket, that's an asset. If I fail to properly screen a tenant and that tenant doesn't pay rent, the house itself is now a liability. Even though it's a great property, even though I could put it on my asset on my balance sheet as an asset, it is a liability because I am still responsible for that mortgage payment every single month. So keep that in mind when you are putting a tenant in your property. And again, this is stuff that I learned. I learned this the hard way. The way you screen, and even if you screen great, it doesn't mean that you're not going to end up in court for an eviction. But the way you screen is one of the most pivotal decisions, one of the most important decisions that you will make as a business owner, as a real estate investor, is putting that tenant in that home. Especially, guys, if you live in a tenant-friendly state or you're acquiring assets in a tenant-friendly state, it becomes even more pivotal. But if that tenant doesn't pay, this asset that you now own has quote unquote become a liability because you have to pay that mortgage every month. Otherwise, you're getting foreclosed on, right? So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And when I say this, when we put this tenant in, this is our first tenant that we dealt with, right? We went solely off of vibes, which is something that you should never do. Never go off vibes, right? We were like, oh, she seems nice. My partner had a showing at one of his other properties that he had owned previously that him and I aren't a part of together. And she had showed up to that showing. She didn't get the house, but he was like, oh, I got this person that's coming to take a look at it. She's really sweet. Like she wants it. She's got to move out of her old place. Like she's ready to go. She's ready to pay our price, X, Y, and Z. And we went solely off vibes. She comes in and yes, she seemed really nice, right? She had a pretty steady job. And we also spoke to her old landlord, which, forget about it. You speak to the old landlord, they're going to say she's amazing, right? She's the best tenant they've ever had. Who knows? Who knows if that's the truth, right? This landlord might just want her out. So he could be like, oh, she's phenomenal. Yeah, take her. She pays on time every single month. She's great. She keeps the house in great shape. And then you know what happens. We inherit her, we bring her in, and it's a disaster, and it was a total lie, right? So you think that you do some of these things, and you kind of go off vibes, but guess what? Vibes don't mean anything, right? Like you do not know those people, the tenants, long enough to really make a judgment call of getting them in. So we failed to really put her through a true screening process. And having said that, we even ultimately at one point, found ourselves in court, obviously, because, things weren't necessarily going right. But what we really did was we made mistakes on the front end and even away from the screening, right? We made mistakes with not properly setting healthy expectations. And what I've come to realize more and more as my time as a landlord is a lot of tenants just don't really take paying rent as such a priority. And I think as someone, I've personally never paid rent except when I was in college, and it was a priority for me in college, right? And I think just with some family members that I have, some of them are in rentals and they're great, right? They know rent's due on the first, they're paying rent every single month. And I think I grew up just around people that ultimately just, that's the way they think, right? It's like, oh, I got to pay my rent this month. I'm going to do everything I can to pay my rent this month. And when you kind of explore into some other areas and you start buying some properties, not everybody thinks that way, right? They just don't, right? To them, there's other things that are more important. What's more important to them is, buying a TV and new furniture and all this other stuff rather than paying the rent. And what I see is a big mistake. We just didn't set proper expectations from the beginning. And that's something that we really want to start doing. I think when I look back on it, what I consistently see is when we didn't set proper expectations, we also just didn't hold them accountable. So if they were paying rent late, or if they were missing payments, I was kind of just deferring to hey, well, listen, let's set up a payment plan, or, oh, that's okay. I totally understand some things happen. And I'm not saying that that's not something that you can't be in general. Of course you want to be lenient if people are going through some tough times and all of that stuff. But again, if we set proper expectations from the jump, listen, rent is due on the 1st. You have a 4-day grace period. If you don't pay by the 5th, you get a late fee. And if you don't pay by the 10th, we file for eviction. That is way more strict and more upfront, and it just lets them know we're not playing games, right? So ultimately, unfortunately, what ends up happening is we have 2 months of missed payments, and we have late fees that are tacked on top. We are trying to do everything we can. We're trying to coordinate, payment plans. We're trying to do anything that we possibly can on that end. And the tenant has totally gone rogue at this point. They're not even responding. So we swing by their house. We put a pay or vacate notice on the door, which pretty much just states hey, if you don't pay within 5 days, we are filing for eviction, which this is something that we should have done, 6 weeks prior, in my opinion, looking back on it. So there's no response to that letter. So I go to the courts, I file for eviction. They give me a court date about 2 weeks later, and I'm thinking there's no way the tenant shows up. So I go to court and she shows up. right? And I'm like, this is out of control. I can't believe she's here. And I go in front of the judge. She goes in front of the judge, and we state our cases. And long story, she's just making excuses. She's just like, I got X, Y, and Z with my job. This happened. And then I'm just stating exact facts, right? I'm just like, look, I have all of the documentation. I have the lease. I have also all of the text messages and the messages through our property management software showing that we've given her multiple times to make these payments and all of this, and nothing has come of it. And what ended up happening was the judge ruled that she had 10 days to make that payment, or I was able to call the sheriff and have a lockout date. Well, long and behold, on that 10th day, we get payments sent to us. And ever since then, her and I have had some conversations. Things have been ironed out. And I think now she realizes that we're not playing games, right? But a lot of this could have been avoided if I just set proper expectations on the front end and really laid down the law, and not in a ruthless way, not in a cruel way, but just in a way of like, listen, this is how this goes. I run a business, right? This is how it needs to be done. And this is what's expected of you as a tenant. And here's what's expected of you from me as a landlord. Because if you need anything, X, Y, and Z, that's my job. I get that done. And what you're responsible for is keeping the place in great shape, treating it with care, and paying your rent and paying your utilities, right? So all of that could have been mitigated. And one thing that I will say is I read Brandon Turner's book, Managing Rental Properties, and this was a life-changing book for me. I highly recommend, if you are getting into the landlord business or if you're in the landlord business, to get this book. It gave me so many good tips that I've started utilizing. And ever since I started utilizing those with my tenants, I've yet to end up in court again, knock on wood, because there's always a chance that I could end up back there. But all in all, you set really good expectations with the tenants. He gives you a lot of documentation that you could use. I don't want to give away his total bonus, but if you buy the book, it also is going to end up coming with like 15 documents that you could use as a landlord, which I found was really, really helpful. And I literally used to this point and to this day. So I highly recommend that book. But again, moral of the story of that is screen properly, get a good property management software, make sure you do a background check, make sure you do a credit check, make sure you do a criminal check, make sure you do an eviction check. Make sure that if they are on income, that you verify their pay stubs, that you talk to their supervisor. I now talk to supervisors and I talk to prior landlords, not just the one that's their current. Because I know that a landlord that was 2 or 3 cycles ago, they're not going to care. They're going to tell me straight up if I'm able to get a hold of them. Whereas the current landlord could absolutely be blowing smoke just to get them out of their house. So we're going to move into the next one. This one's not as flashy, not as attractive, but I'm going to talk about bookkeeping. So bookkeeping is the art of, like, if I do 100 transactions in a month, categorizing those transactions to renovations on a certain project, rental income, expenses, mortgage payments, all that other stuff. It categorizes all of that. And when my partner and I first started in this business, like, we were not doing bookkeeping, right? We had our different LLCs that were open for different properties. And again, I'm not an attorney in regards to how any of you take this stuff. I have 3 LLCs. I put about 5 properties in each LLC. Once I hit that 5 count, I'm pretty much pivoting. I'm opening a new LLC and starting into that LLC. That's just my way. There are people that open up an LLC for every single property. There are other people that just have one LLC with all of their properties. Other people set up holding companies. There's probably a better way to do it than I'm doing it right now, but for right now, this works for me. But long story short, we were not doing bookkeeping, right? So there's 2 problems with not bookkeeping, and especially not bookkeeping early. Number one is disorganization. And what we had noticed was we had about 5 renovations going on at one point. We were acquiring like 2 or 3 more deals that month. There was money flying in and out of these accounts like it was like water, right? Like there was no control. We were paying contractors every single day. Boom, 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 payments. We were getting rental incomes between the 1st and the 5th, and in some cases the 10th and past that, right? There was no organization, and it becomes very, very hard to maintain and to control at that point, right? And ultimately, we don't know like where we're really spending money. So we'll look at the account one day and it'll look really high. And then we'll look at the account the other day and it will look really low. And we're like, where'd all the money go? And we're backtracking. We're pulling up statements and we're trying to backtrack. So that's a really big problem, especially when you're scaling, but just in general to kind of have an idea of where your money's going. And another issue with lack of bookkeeping is you really don't understand how an asset is performing. Right? So if I have a property and we put $40,000 in renovations for it and I get a tenant in there and they're, paying me every single month through rent and we're paying money out on expenses. And then let's just say they have a few things that break that month and we have to pay, money towards fixing those things. We're unable to really see like how it's actually going. Are we making money in the long term on that deal? Did we make money on the short term? Like, where are we right now? Compare it to our other properties that we have. So bookkeeping is really, really essential. And it was something that I tried to take on in the beginning and just fell flat on my face, right? Like I graduated University of Delaware with a finance degree. You would think I would actually like be somewhat good with some of this stuff. I didn't graduate with an accounting degree, but still you would think I'd be like decent. I wasn't. I was a disaster at it. And it just fell through the wayside. And my partner and I, Steve, like we have good division on what we do. I mainly handle like acquisitions and property management, where he handles a lot of the project management. That's kind of how we divide and conquer. And we brought on a couple people to run some other different departments. But really, when it comes to bookkeeping, when it comes to property management, when it comes to project management, anything, what I have learned is to ask myself 3 questions. So if I'm looking at a job, I need to ask myself 3 questions. Number 1, do I want to do it? Number 2, do I have the skills to do it? And number 3, do I have the bandwidth to do it? Do I have the time? And if I answer no to any of those 3, it's a telltale sign that I should probably go hire out for this job. And I might not necessarily get to it immediately, but I need to, right? All right, if I don't have the skills, I have to make a choice. Do I want to develop those skills, or do I want to bring somebody in that has those skills? If I don't have the time, I have to make the choice. Could I cut other things that are eating at my time to fit time for this, or do I need to bring somebody on? And bookkeeping was one of those things where I just knew I didn't have the skills for it. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. It's not necessarily that I didn't want to do it. I don't mind doing it, but I'm just not good at it, right? So I'm answering 2 of those things as no's. So we brought on a bookkeeper to get all of our stuff organized. And lo and behold, it costed us hundreds of dollars, because now we're talking about 6 months of no bookkeeping that he now needs to organize. So that's really the bulk of it. And then we'll put him on a monthly payment, and for every single month he'll do the bookkeeping and he'll send us the reports and all of that stuff. And those reports are huge. Those are huge reports, right? Those are profit and losses. That's income statement. That's balance sheet. That's cash flow statements. These are things that, as a serious, legitimate investor, you need to know. You need to know, is this asset performing? How could I capitalize? And we talked about this in the last episode, right? Usually if an asset isn't performing, there's 2 ways to get it to perform better. You could usually either increase rents if it's a rental, or you could decrease expenses, right? So by having those statements, by having that information through bookkeeping, we are now able to make more educated decisions moving forward. And when I look back on these past, 8 months of a frenzy of buying a lot of these houses, if we would have had better bookkeeping in place, if we were more organized, we would have made better decisions, which would have costed us less mistakes, which would have costed us less money. And again, this reverts back to one of the other lessons we talked about earlier when we talked about that whole sewer pipe situation. Don't be stingy on pricing, right? If you know, I don't want to do this, or I don't have the skills to do this, or I don't have the bandwidth to do it, bring somebody else in. It's going to save you more money in the long run. We're going to go into a couple more that I have. I think one other thing, this isn't like as serious, but it's good to know when you're doing project management, it's really important to have like good organization on what you're going to do, right? So if you if you're acquiring an asset and you're looking at the job, set a good checklist of like order of operations, right? So like what we were doing before is we were just like sending some guys in, and they started doing some flooring and some paint, and then we were sending like electricians in, and then they needed to cut into the drywall, which we just had painted. Like all these little things that like just ultimately mean more of a timeline on the renovation, and ultimately are going to lead to more money out of your pocket because you're going to have to fix things that you already had fixed. So what we do now is we really set like a good checklist. We break our renovations up into 2 phases. Renovation phase 1 is really sending in like our big subcontractors, like our crews, our electrician, our HVAC service, our plumbing, anything that might require us to have to rip down walls, gut things, and do all of that stuff. We send those guys in, our demo, our clean out, our roofer, all of that stuff. And then after that, we send in our general contractor who's going in there and putting the house back together. And with that flow, it's helped us really kind of, move more swiftly through the renovations and stay on timeline for that 3-month seasoning period where we're able to refinance, get tenants in there, and do all of that stuff. So that's one that in the very beginning, we were making a lot of mistakes on that. We were just sending guys in kind of very unorganized. Now we've broken it down into reno phase 1, reno phase 2, which allows us to move more swiftly. And ultimately, it's going to get even better. We're going to break that down even more. We're going to find ways to be more efficient, but that's how we kind of operated that one. And then the last one, guys, that I have is one, this is more of a little bit more of like a mindset. And I've had some good experiences with this. I've had some bad experiences with this. There's a fine line when you're a real estate investor, when you're a landlord, between like running a business and running a charity. And a charity might be like a little bit of an extreme word for it because we're not obviously running like a charity. But what I mean by that is like I've inherited a handful of tenants. And I always try, and I think this is just like the moral compass in me, which I'm happy to have, but I always try to find a solution to the problem, right? So we've inherited tenants that are living in squalor, that are living in rough housing, and they're paying way under market. And I always usually try to go in there and have some sort of conversation around getting them up to market rent, telling them, hey, we're going to fix this place up. We're going to make it really, really nice. Can you pay this amount of money, X, Y, and Z, right? And in some cases, that's worked out really well. In some cases, it's not. And when I see that it hasn't, it's just because I haven't done a good enough job of really talking to that tenant prior, right? So I'll give you two examples. We had a property that we closed on. This was at the end of October. And there was a tenant in there, and it was a mom with her daughter. And there was like kind of like a husband involved, but he was like in and out. Like I heard from the prior landlord that he wasn't going to be around anymore, but then he was kind of still there. So I don't really know what was going on. But long story short, it was like basically a single mom and her daughter. And we're buying this property and we're getting it for a great price. We have another house that's right around the corner. Like this is a slam dunk deal for us. And she is paying way under market. She's paying about 50% of what we would charge for a fully renovated property. So we're buying it in October. And I am having conversations with the landlord, and the landlord's telling me that, hey, she's totally fine with leaving X, Y, and Z. And in the past, and I'll get to a story about this, in the past, I would accept that, right? I would say, oh, great, she knows that she's got to go. That's cool. We're going to, close the deal. I'll send her an introductory email and I'll ask when she's leaving. But what I've done in this case was I said, hey, look, like I respect your opinion. I appreciate your words on this, but I need to make sure that I am getting in front of this tenant and setting healthy expectations and talking with them. So I meet the tenant. And I have her sign a vacate notice, which explains that she's going to be out. But I also give her 2 full months to do it. I think, right? October to November, November to December. December 31st, which is in a couple of days. So, and thankfully, this is all going smoothly. But I set healthy expectations with the tenant. I said, hey, look, we're buying this house. We have one of two options here. We could either temporarily relocate you into one of our other properties, and then we could bring you back in here. But once this place is fully renovated, you're going to be paying market rent, which is twice the amount of what you're paying. Or I could give you 60 days and give you 60 days to vacate as long as that works for you. And she said she was totally fine with the 60 days. She'll be out by the new year. I had her sign that she was vacating notice. I had her sign, or I signed a receipt of the vacate notice. So I have that in my files. I have that in documentation just in case things go south and I end up having to bring her to court. But long behold, time has progressed. She's done everything that she said that she was going to do. And within a couple of days, she has told me that she has plans to move out. She already has a place lined up for January 1st. So that is an example of where that went right. Now, where this has gone wrong in the past, which I have learned from, is by just taking a prior landlord's word that they are going to vacate, right? Even if they have some sort of vacate notice that they had signed, do the dirty work of getting in front of the tenant and talking with them directly and just say, hey, look, like, I'm going to be buying this house. This is how my business operates. I need to renovate these homes so that I could refinance them, pay back my lender, and then have a good property that I could put on a long-term mortgage so that I could rent out for, the future terms. If this is something that you think you might end up wanting to be a tenant of ours, I could put you in another one of my properties, or I could temporarily relocate you while you do this. You could still try to find a solution, but if you don't have that conversation, it's usually going to lead to some negative, feedback and some unfortunate scenarios, which is exactly what I'm dealing with one right now. We had purchased this duplex. It had a tenant on the bottom floor that was paying way under market value. She's been there for like 12 years. And I had inherited her. I didn't have a conversation with her prior. And I saw the lease, and the lease straight up says that I could give 5 days notice before telling her that she's got to bounce. Again, I'm not in the business of kicking people out and putting them on the street. I hate doing it. I don't like doing it at all. So what ends up happening is I send her an email. And I pretty much say, hey, look, I'm your new landlord. I have no intentions of kicking you out. Like, that's absolutely not what I want to do. But you're paying way below market value. I'm going to put you on a payment plan to slowly increase your monthly payment. Right? I was pretty much going from the next 30 days would go up 100 to the days after that, it would go up 30, it would go up another 100 to like 3 months after that, it would go up 200, pretty much just giving her an opportunity to stay in the unit, paying a little bit more. And because she's on a month-to-month lease, she could still leave whenever she needed. And lo and behold, she flips out. Right? She flips out. She says that she, isn't leaving. And then a day later she calls. She says that she is leaving. And lo and behold, we are now months into this and like she's still there. And I'm dealing with this problem and I can evict her, but I am really doing everything that I can to not do that. It's not as pressing of a matter for me at this current moment. And again, some people that are listening as landlords, you guys are probably going to be like, this guy's out of his mind. You need to evict her. But at the end of the day, I also know that she's paying less than anyone could possibly afford. And if I evict her, it's going to be on her record, and I pretty much am putting her out on the street, and that's something that I really don't want to do. So I am working with the city officials to try to find her some sort of other housing or to put her on some sort of community action, so that way she could actually be a tenant of mine or a tenant somewhere else. And again, long behold, it's just a headache that I'm dealing with, and it's a cross that I'm bearing, and it's not like something that's like keeping me up at night per se. It's just, it's a tenant situation that I'm dealing with. But long story short is, if I would have just properly screened and I would have saw that this would have been the interaction, that she would have been really hostile about it, and I would have had a problem on my hands, I would have done one of two things. I would have either said to the landlord that I was buying it, I'm not purchasing this until you get her to vacate, right? Like, that's on your plate. You are her current landlord. You deal with that situation. Or I would have readjusted my numbers based on the fact that it's been months and she hasn't left yet, right? I would have renegotiated the price, or I would have maybe changed up my strategy a little bit on how I acquire it, whatever the case might be. But the moral of the story is really make sure you get in front of these tenants that you're inheriting, have some conversations with them, really understand like what this is going to look like for you for the next coming months. Is this going to lead to me having to evict this person? Do I think that they're going to be, someone that's able to like kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily compromise, but be compatible with what I need done? Or is this going to be, a headache that I'm going to have to deal with? And do I need to readjust? So we're walking that fine line between business and, again, I use the word charity. It's definitely not necessarily charity, but that's something that as a landlord, you're probably going to face. And my personal opinion is really to set those healthy expectations up front. So as I look back on 2024, there's been some phenomenal moments of growing the portfolio. There's also been some crazy mistakes that have been made. But like I've mentioned in the beginning of the episode, you got to take those mistakes and you got to find the seeds of opportunity within them. And if you could find those seeds of opportunity and you could create systems and processes around it, now you are going from just like growth within a business to actually scaling the business, right? And there's a difference there. Growth is exactly what I experienced like the first 4 to 6 months. It's just buying a lot of properties and doing a lot of crazy things and like having some success, but also having some failures. And then there's scaling. And scaling is taking the, recipe of growth and organizing it out and making it sustainable over the long term. And that is what we are moving towards as we get into 2025, is really the best way and the smartest way to scale. So that's pretty much been it. But it's all fun. It's always a pleasure doing, and I love what I do. And I'm very, very blessed to have at this point stepped into being a full-time real estate investor, as I left my W-2 job back in June and have jumped into this full-time. So it's been an awesome year. I appreciate the great feedback that I've gotten on the show. As I've mentioned, I dropped this starting in beginning of December. It's been about a full month now. We've had some really awesome downloads. I looked at some stats. I'm in Europe a little bit. I got some viewers and listeners in Italy. So if you're in Italy, Russia, Sweden, I saw Canada, South Africa, I saw a couple people. I really, really appreciate you guys listening. And if you can, please rate the show. Please review the show. Please like, subscribe, follow, and make sure you follow me on Instagram and DM me any questions that you guys have. If you guys need anything at all, Frankie D'Astoli _REI. I love to answer them. And we are going to get back in the beginning of the new year with a plan, how to put together a solid plan to go into 2025 and to absolutely crush it. So I'm looking forward to that episode, and I appreciate everybody listening. Peace out.